Hi everyone. I hope everybody's doing well in this Thursday afternoon. So in today's webinar, we're going to go through the invitation rules for both replacement requests and open shifts, and the different settings that we can set up as well for both those options. So the first thing I want to go through with you is I want to go through the settings and go through general settings under permissions. And then I want to talk about the assignments and the replacements settings. So the difference between a replacement request and an open shift is that an open shift in the schedule is going to be displayed at the top of your schedule here in open shifts, which means it is not assigned to any employees. However, when an open shift is published, it will send an invitation according to the invitation rules that you have set up in your account. Uh, the difference between an open shift and a replacement is that a replacement still sends the invitation to the same employees. However, a replacement request is stays in the schedule of an employee until the replacement has been completed. So let's say, for example, here Clara's shift with the yellow dot here on Friday tomorrow is looking for a replacement. So therefore, what this means is that the shift is going to stay on Clara's schedule if it has not found a replacement. So it's still Clara's shift until it is being replaced. So if you go over to the settings and go over permission settings, you first of all have the assignments settings in which you can require an approval for OpenShift assignment or not. So if this is activated whenever there's employees interested to work on an open shift, it will require a manual assignment by a manager, a supervisor, or an admin for that employee to be assigned to the shift. If it is not activated, then the first employee that takes the shift that applies on the shift will automatically be assigned to will automatically be assigned to that shift. In terms of replacement requests, however, there is two level of approvals that are available. So there's one level of approval which is before the request is sent to other employees. What this means is that whenever an employee requests a replacement, it requires a manager's approval before it is sent over to the employees that would be invited. So I, as an employee, let's say, for example, request a replacement for this upcoming Saturday. It is not immediately sent to all employees. It would require an approval by the manager. So if you don't want to have that approval level, you can always just uncheck that option here, which is called approval required for replacement requests. And then you also have approval required for replacement assignments, which is basically once there are employees interested to work on that replacement, do you want them to be assigned automatically if they're the first to apply? Or once again, a little bit like the open shift, would you like a manager to assign the interested employees to the shift manually? So if you deactivate that option, the first person that applies on a replacement will get that shift. If you activate that option, it will require an approval by a manager to assign the shift to the one of the employees that is interested to work on the shift. Now, how do we figure out who's invited to the shift, and how do we set this up? This is done in the invitation and assignment part. So whenever we go into that part, you have the invitation management, which is where you can set up the invitation rules that will be applied to your account. Or you can also go into invitation and assignment priority, which is where you create your invitation rules. So basically in there are standard and advanced type of invitation rule. So a standard invitation rule is just an invitation rule that sends the invitation to all the employees that have the team, the position, and location of the shift in their profile. And it will be sent in order of the standard rule that you've selected. So let's say I go with most senior first. What this means is that all the employees will be invited by seniority order, which means by their hiring date. So the one with the employee with the most, well, the oldest hiring date will receive the invitation first, and the second one, then the third one, then the fourth one, then the fifth one. and there's there's not much else to it. It's a standard invitation rule because that's what it lets you do. But then in an advanced invitation rule, there's a lot of different settings that you can go through. So let's say I were to go and create an advanced invitation rule right now. I could go and add a new invitation rule, and then I would select the advanced type. I would then name my invitation rule for, so I already created this morning for the French webinar an invitation rule that was called test 2. So I'm going to call this one test 3. And then I'm going to click on next. So in the invitation phases, you decide two things in this part. You decide in what order, which employee is going to be invited to the shift, and in what order they're going to be invited. So let's say, for example, in invitation priority here, I will decide in what order the employees invited will be invited. So there's many different criterias I can go by. So I could go by highest score first, which is a score that you can assign per position in an employee's profile. You could go by most senior employee first, most hours first in a week, most hour or least hours first in a week, least hours first in 2 weeks, or most hours first in 2 weeks. You could go by most or least experience. So experience is different from seniority, in which experience is the amount of hours that the employee worked on a position, on the position of the shift. And then there's also most experience first total or least experience first total. So total experience is the amount of hours that the employee has worked on all of his positions. So you can decide in what order employees are going to be invited, or you could just also invite all employees at once, which is something that is pretty common in those invitation rules amongst the customers that we have. Then once you select your invitation priority, if it is an invitation priority that obviously invites one employee at a time, so all of these except all employees, you can decide a delay between each invitation. So if you select, for example, 5 minutes, each invitation will be sent each 5 minutes. So the first employee will be send the invitation, will have the invitation sent to them. Then the second employee will receive the invitation, then the third, then the fourth, and then go so on and so forth. Then after that, you can decide the invitation criteria. So this is where you decide who is going to receive the invitation. So in the team's positions and locations, there's those 5 settings that you can set up. So let's say we're going to use the teams as example. You can send invitation to employees having the exact team in their profile. So only inviting the employees that have the team in their profile. Teams that have this team as a primary team in their profile. So in an employee's profile, you can assign multiple teams, but you can also assign primary teams, primary positions, primary locations. You can also decide to only send the invitation to employees who have this team as a preferred team. So this is requested in the availability. So employees can request their favorite team in their availability, and you can use that for invitation rules afterwards. You can invite the employees with the exact team or fallback teams. So let's say, for example, for a specific team, I could have 2 other teams that are fallback to this team, which means that an employee with either or of those fallback teams could get invited to that specific shift. I'll go and show you how to set up those fallback teams later on during this webinar. And then you also have the option to include all teams, so to ignore basically this field when you invite the employees. You invite employees no matter what their team is. So these settings, they can be done for positions and locations as well. And after that, you could invite employees according to their statuses. So let's say, for example, I want this invitation rule in the first phase of invitation to invite only the full-time employee. I could remove all the statuses and only check the full-time employees and only invite the full-time employees in that phase. Then I can decide to invite employees that have at least a certain amount of hours during the week, or that do not go over a certain amount of hours during that same week. Or I could also go by pay period. So let's say, for example, I were to put 40 hours here. If I were to create a shift that would make an employee go over 40 hours, if they were to accept that shift, then that employee would not get invited to work on that shift. You can also ignore scheduled conflicts. So what this will do is that if it is not activated, if an employee has a shift at the same time as the shift that is created either as a replacement or an open shift, they would not get invited. However, if you ignore, I'm sorry, scheduled conflicts, the employees would still get invited to that shift even if they're scheduled to work at the same time of that shift. That's a setting that you can activate. And you can also ignore employees' availability. So if you want to invite employees, even though they're not available to work on that shift, you can activate that feature, that setting. And finally, for the first phase of invitation, you can decide the delay between the first phase and the second phase. So let's say I put in 1 hour here, 1 hour after the end of the first phase, it will send the invitation to the second phase. And then in the second phase, I can go and do the same exact setup. So let's say, for example, in that second phase, I want to invite all the employees that are not full-time. In that case, I would go ahead and just remove the check on full-time. And then I would just click on next. And I could create like more than two invitation phases. But basically, invitation phases is who is going to get invited and in what order they were going to get invited. And after that, you have assignment priority. Assignment priority is how the employees that are interested are going to be displayed when a manager goes and assign them. So if there's 5 interested employees on the shift, how are these employees going to be sorted for the manager? So once again, in the assignment priority, the setup looks pretty similar to the invitation phases. So for example, here I can set up a level of priority in which the employees are going to be displayed through the interested employees. So in my invitation phases, I invited all employees at the same time in both phases that correspond to the criteria. However, in my assignment priority, I want the employees to be sorted by the most senior first. Well, I could go and select most senior first, which is the default setting here. I could also go once again with the same criterias that were mentioned in the invitation phases, but there is a new criteria here, which is the fastest answer first. So if you want the employees with the fastest answer to be displayed before the other employees, you can set it up this way. Then after that, once I've selected my first level of priority, I can select a second level of priority. What this will do is that if there's a tie between 2 employees for the first criteria, you can select a tiebreaker in some way for one employee to be first before the second. So let's say I have 2 employees that take the shift, but they started working on the same date. They have the same hiring date. Well, then in that case, I could have a second criteria, which would be, well, I want to have the employee with the fastest answer first between both of those employees. And then after that, we get to the groups. So in the groups, you can go and create groups in which the interested employees will be split in. So usually these groups will reflect the invitation phases that you had earlier on. So let's say, for example, in my case, I invited the employees that are full-time first. Well, therefore, it would be pretty logical if I want the employees that are full-time to be displayed first in my groups of assignment priority. So therefore, I will go and create the first group, which I would call, in that case, full-time. And then I'll select the exact team, the exact position, the exact location, because this is how I created the invitation phases. And then in the employee statuses, I would just select full-time. And I can also make it so I do not want to display employees that do not respect, let's say, the maximum amount of hours that I've entered in their profile. Because in an employee's profile, you can go and enter a maximum amount of hours per week or per pay period. So if an employee were to go over that amount of hours by taking that shift, they would not be displayed in my group, for example, here. And then I could add a second group, which would be, in that case, all the other statuses. I could call it everyone else. And then in that group, I'd have just everyone except full-time. And then once again, I could decide to check the option to respect the maximum hours. Once I'm done creating my groups, I finally have the option to auto assign shifts with a certain delay setup. So the way this works is that there's two different types of delay. There's a delay before the shift start, and there's a delay after shift publication. So delay before shift start is a delay, basically the amount of hours before the start of the shift. So let's say I were to put 48 hours here. 48 hours before the start of the shift would be assigned automatically to the first employee in the assignment priority that I have set up. So in that case, it would be assigned to the most senior full-time employee that accepted the shift. And you can do the same thing, but for a delay after the shift publication. So in that case, if I were to put 48 hours, it would be 48 hours from the moment I publish the shift. Then 48 hours after that, the shift would be assigned automatically once again to the first employee according to my assignment priority. So to go through all of this just one last time, the invitation phases are the employees that will be invited to the shift and in what order. And in the assignment priority is the order in which the employees will be displayed for the manager to assign the employees. So once I'm done creating my invitation rule, I'll just uncheck those two boxes here. I can click on save, and then this invitation rule will be added into the account. Then when I go into invitation management, I can go and select a rule, an invitation rule that will be applied by default to the shifts that I create in my account. So let's say, for example, I want to change this this invitation rule for test 3 instead of test 2 that I've created earlier this morning. I can change it this way. And then I can also assign invitation rules for specific teams or positions or locations. So let's say I want test 3 to be applied to all of my teams, but for a specific team, I want another rule to be applied. I could go and select, let's say, the cafeteria team, click on next, and then have the invitation rule be, let's say, test 2 for this team instead of test 3. That's something you can do as well. You can have specific invitation rules split up by teams, locations, or positions, or even divisions. So once I'm done setting this up, I can go into my, well, actually, before I go and show that, I want to show you in employee mobility how to manage the fallback invitations. So remember a few minutes earlier, I talked about how you can invite employees that are not necessarily employees of the specific team, but could be employees of a fallback team. Well, this is where you can set up your fallback team's positions or locations. So let's say, for example, for my dermatology team, I want the ophthalmology team to be a secondary team, a fallback team. I could go and click on the three dots here, manage, and select the ophthalmology team as a fallback. So therefore, employees of that team will be invited whenever there is a shift of dermatology created if in the invitation rule fallback teams were invited to work on those shifts. So this is how you set up those fallback teams that will be invited once you select the fallback option in the invitation rules. And once I go back into the schedule, this is where I'll be able to see my this is where I'll be able to create my open shift as well as my replacement. So let's say, for example, I want to create an open shift for tomorrow, Saturday the 15th. And let's say I want to create it for the cardiology team. I'm just going to go and select anything in here. Doesn't really matter. Wait, I created for an employee. I wanted to create an open shift right here. I'm sorry, an open shift right here, an open shift. Cardiology. And then you see here it says 3 employees will be invited. I can create and publish, and I will see that those 3 employees will be invited to work on the shift. So there's Dennis here who's going to be invited before the other employees because those employees are not full-time employees, so they'll be invited. You see, I published it at 1:20 p.m., so these employees will be invited at 2:20 p.m. in that case. So now I've created an open shift, and let's say I were to create another shift. Let's say I'm just going to copy this one and paste it here. Let's say I were to publish this. Oops. Right click and publish. And then I would create a replacement from this one. You see that in the replacement, the same employees are invited because it's the same invitation rule. So you see when it's a replacement request, it shows a yellow dot. And when it's an open shift request, it shows a red dot. So whenever you go into your dashboard after this, you can see the amount of open shifts and replacement requests that you currently have in your schedule. So currently in my dashboard at the top right corner here, I'm showing for a period of 30 days those information. I could change the amount of days that I want to display this information for. So I could go for 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, 90 days, or a custom period of time. So currently I'm seeing the information for the next 30 days. So if I click on an open shift here, I can see that there's an open shift right here. And if I click on the open shift, I see the employees that are invited, and I can see if there's any interested employees. Same thing for replacements here. I'll be able to see the replacement request, and I'll be able to see if there's any employees interested on the replacements. But whenever there are employees interested to work on an open shift or a replacement, they will be displayed here in shifts with interested employees on your dashboard. So you don't have to go through your schedule and look at every individual open shifts or replacements. If there's employees that have applied, you will see it directly here in your dashboard. So whenever I click on that, I will be able to see the employees that are interested to work on that specific shift. And then whenever there's an employee is interested to work on the shift, whenever you open that shift, let's say I open this open shift or the replacement, next to the employee's name here, there will be an option for you to assign the employee directly from here. And on the schedule, those shifts will be displayed with a green raised hand logo. So whenever there's an employee is interested to work on the shift, you will see a green raised hand logo. So let me show you an example of that. Let's say, for example, I'm going to go and add myself as an invited employee. I'm going to log in from my phone, and I'm going to apply on that shift. I'm going to put myself as interested. And then you will see that now when I go to the dashboard, I'm able to see that I have one shift with an interested employee. I see that I myself am interested because I logged in as an employee and I applied on the shift. And I can see that there's a button here to assign the employee directly, which is what I was explaining a few minutes earlier. And then whenever I go to the schedule, this is what the green raised hand logo that I'm talking about is going to look like. So you can see directly on the schedule that you have interested employees to work on that shift. So this pretty much goes through the different settings, different options that I wanted to go through with you today. We still have time for questions. So if there's any one of you with questions, I'll leave you a few minutes to ask your questions. Feel free to questions. I'll leave you a few minutes to ask your question. I just have to blow my nose real quick, so I'll close my camera and my microphone. I'll be back in a few seconds. So yeah, if there's no question, I'll just end the webinar here. As usual, webinars will be available on our website for reviewing. So it's going to be available next week. I appreciate you all for joining today, and I wish you a great rest of the week and a great weekend as well.